Okay, welcome. We're going to start by just taking a quick look at the updated website. Here we go. And some of the new features, we have the class notes by the month. We have last week's class on there. Wait, hold on. For January 2021. I'm now in the process of putting on this website all the books we use and all the websites that I reference. So you have links to those. So for example, we have recommended reading, all the R.E.A. Kaplan books, some of the self-mastery books, and in addition, links to helpful sites.
Yeah, Napoleon Hill.
There it is, Zhang Zhang.
Zhang.
Napoleon Hill is great.
Yeah.
And in the blog, I'm posting a lot of good articles that we find. In addition, there'll be different notes and stuff, but we're able to upload the PDF to the blog. So you'll have the original text there.
This is like a Steve Coburn brain dump.
This whole project is a brain dump. It's nice because I get to connect everything. I like it.
Very good. I
And
remember
we've got all the classes here.
I remember when you originally mentioned Avram Avinu as a martial artist.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So now we're going to go to today's text. Good. Okay. We had two questions from last week, which I'll go over when we start the meditation. I did the meditation standing up for the second week. Without knowing the suggested points of practice, I closed my eyes. So there's an issue related to closing the eyes. We'll discuss that. Second question was, I realized that I may have made slight internal movements during meditation, but they wouldn't be noticeable to an outside observer. What are your thoughts on whether this is movement or not? I will answer that with the expertise of an expert master meditator, world-renowned. Okay, so we'll save that for the meditation part of the class. Now we'll continue with Rabbi Kaplan's teachings about the Amidah's meditation, picking up with the first bracha of the Amidah, the reference to our God. Can you see that? And for some reason, I can't see what's on the screen, but it's from Jewish Meditation. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, good. Hello.
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 Yeah, that was a yes for me too, but I didn't realize I had muted myself.
Okay. Okay, this is what he says. After we say Baruch Atah Hashem, okay, the very next word is Elokeinu, which is translated as our God. This shows the extent to which God allows us to relate to him and draw close. As far above us as he is, he allows us to address him as our God, as if in a sense he belonged to us. This is perhaps the greatest gift and miracle of all that God allows us to call him ours. The full expression in which we address God as ours is, our God and God of our fathers, Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu. The Baal Shem Tov explains this expression in the following manner. There are two ways in which we can know God. First, we know about God because we have heard about him from others. We have inherited a tradition about God from our fathers, from our ancestors, and from all the great people of the past. This, however, is not enough. No matter how much a person may have heard about God, he must also have his own personal experience of God. Unless a person has experienced God for himself, he will never have any true idea of what God is. In a way, it is like love. If you have ever been in love, then you know what I mean when I speak about love. But if you have never been in love, the word is totally abstract. You may imagine that love is something very nice, but you have no experience of it. Even if you read what poets sing about love, you can understand it only on the most abstract level. However, if you have ever been in love, the word will have very powerful connotations for you. The same is true of God. If you have experienced closeness to God even once in your lifetime, then when I speak about God, you know exactly what I mean, and the concept has a very strong spiritual connotation. But if you have never had this experience, then God is something very abstract and can be described only on an intellectual level. We can speak about God, argue about him, and even debate his existence. However, if you have ever experienced God, then there is nothing to talk about. As soon as I mention the word God, you know exactly what I am speaking about, since God is as much part of your experience as he is of mine. One who has never been in love might argue that love does not exist. The same is true of one who has never experienced God. But for one who has had the experience, there is no question. All right, so you can see we're heading in a direction of, well, how do you experience God? Okay. When one experiences God, however, there is always the danger that is a false experience. That is, you may think that you are experiencing God, but you may actually be experiencing something very different. It is for this reason that we say, and God of our fathers. The experience of God is not something that we are inventing, something that has no relation to our past. Rather, it is part of a tradition that goes back to our earliest ancestors. We affirm that we are not going off in our quest for God on our own, but doing so as part of an unbroken chain of tradition. When we say God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob, we mention the patriarchs because we see them as having attained the ultimate experience of God. For them, the experience of God was so strong that they were willing to challenge their environment and change their lives because of it, becoming the spiritual trailblazers for millions that followed them. At this opening point in the Amidah, we attempt to direct our consciousness to the level of closeness to God that the patriarchs had experienced. It is taught that Abraham's primary experience of God was that of his greatness, whereas Isaac experienced God's strength and Jacob experienced his awesomeness. Thus, the peak experiences of the patriarchs correspond to the next three expressions in the Amidah, the great, the mighty, the awesome God, which we're going to go over next week. But so you can see what Rabbi Kaplan is saying is that we want to experience God when we're saying the Amidah, and we're not going to fake it. We're basically telling God, we're attempting to do what Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and everybody else who's davened after that has tried to do, experience you. Okay, so Rabbi Kaplan says that each one of the avot of the patriarchs experienced God in a different way. How did they get around to doing that? Okay, that's our question. How can we match the closeness to God experienced by the patriarchs? To start to answer that question, we're going to look at another teaching by Rabbi Kaplan that's in this book, the Aryeh Kaplan Anthology. And it has actually 4 books he wrote, all in this one. We're going to focus on the one called The Infinite Light, a book about God. Okay. So hold on. Okay. Good. Just hold on one second. Very good. We're going to go back to this now. Okay, this is what he says. The introduction to this particular book by Rabbi Kaplan is by a scholar named Baruch Taub, and this is what he says. Baruch Taub, so we need to know if Marty Taub was related to a Baruch Taub. Okay, we'll find that out. This is what he says, and it's an introduction to a number of teachings that Rabbi Kaplan has about God. This is what Baruch Taub says. Achieving an awareness of God is a difficult task. The pursuit of that awareness involves relentless study and questioning, as well as mitzvah observance and Torah living. As Jews, we do not rely on dreams and heavenly manifestations to actualize God's presence in our lives. The true appreciation of a purposeful, personal God can only derive from a purposeful life in accordance with a purposeful creation. So it's not an instantaneous, like drop the LSD and now you got it type of thing. The first human being to recognize the existence of God through his own observation was Abraham. Some commentaries say that this spectacular feat was accomplished at the age of 46, when his mental powers had attained their greatest acuity. Others maintain that it was at the age of 3 that Abraham experienced the original auto-induced personal revelation. Okay, so what Baruch Taub is saying, as a summary of what Rabbi Kaplan taught on this topic, is that it's a long, arduous process to experience God that involves a lot of inquiry, relentless study and questioning, as well as performing certain deeds, mitzvot. It's a lifestyle. Okay, so, and that is distinguished from a, well, I've got experience now type of thing. And interestingly, in another book, Rabbi Kaplan talks about how so many people, including Jews, were part of the drug culture and they took acid to try to emulate this experience. But obviously, it's not authentic because you're not developing a so-called relationship with God. The only way to develop the relationship with God is to use your mind and dedicate your life to doing it. Okay. Now, since Baruch Taub mentioned that this whole process, this whole, the model for establishing this relationship with God and experiencing God was first initiated by Avraham Avinu, by the patriarch Abraham, we need to learn a little bit about how did Abraham actually do that. And for that, we have the benefit of the Rambam. Okay. How did Abraham recognize the existence of God through his own observation? We have the translation of the commentary on the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, by Eliyahu Tauger. For those that are not familiar, this is an unparalleled set of teachings about Jewish living, Jewish belief, Jewish law that the Rambam Maimonides compiled. And the way he did this was he went through the Torah, the Tanakh, both Gemaras, Tosefta, Midrashim, and principally the Sifra and Sifrei. He went through all these works and compiled 14 volumes like this. Everything you wanted to know and then some about Torah living and Torah thinking. Okay, and this was done here between 1170 and 1180, so almost 1,000 years ago. Okay. He writes, and he tells the story of Avraham Avinu and how Avraham actually did experience God, and he tells it in story form. I'm going to relate this story to you. So get comfortable because it's wonderful. Okay. During the times of Enosh, and Enosh was the grandson of Adam, mankind made a great mistake. And the wise men of that generation gave thoughtless counsel. Enosh himself was one of those who erred, and Tauger makes a point of pointing out that this wasn't just your uneducated guy that made this. This was elite, top crust of society that made this error. What was their error? Their mistake was as follows. They said God created stars and spheres with which to control the world. He placed them on high and treated them with honor, making them servants who minister before him, meaning God. Accordingly, it is fitting to praise and glorify them and to treat them with honor. They perceive this to be the will of God, blessed be he, that they magnify and honor those whom he magnified and honored, just as a king desires that the servants who stand before him be honored. Indeed, doing so is an expression of honor to the king. So they basically said, if we honor God and God created stuff like stars, we should honor them. After conceiving of this notion, they began to construct temples to the stars and offer sacrifices to them. They would praise and glorify them with words and prostrate themselves before them, because by doing so they would, according to their false conception, be fulfilling the will of God. So you can see right off the bat, they made a mistake of mistaking the creation for the creator. This was the essence of the worship of false gods. And this was the rationale of those who worship them. And by the way, you can see how far back this goes. Adam Rishon was probably alive at the time. They would not say that there was no other God except for this star. This message was conveyed by Jeremiah, who declared, "Who will not fear you, King of the nations? For to you it is fitting. Among all the wise men of the nations and in all their kingdoms, there is none like you. They have one foolish and senseless notion. They conceive of their empty teachings as wood, meaning all know that you alone are God. Their foolish error consists of conceiving of this emptiness as your will." So Jeremiah is basically saying they are praying to false gods. They have a false sense of spirituality. And they're mistaking it for you, God. They think that you're kind of in the jar. After many years passed, there arose people, false prophets, who told the people that God had commanded them to say, serve this star or all the stars, sacrifice to it, offer libations to it, build a temple for it, and make an image of it so that all people, including the women, the children, and the common people, could bow to it. So you can see that's like an example of a real slippery slope. You mistake the creation for the creator, and then you set up places to it, and now you have people taking charge and saying, let me tell you how to pray here. There's this whole society built on falsehood based on this false way of thinking. He would inform them of a form that had conceived and tell them that this is the image of the particular star, claiming that this was revealed to him in a prophetic vision. So you can see the craziness that they're fabricating these ideas. They're fabricating this whole worldview based on falsehood. In this manner, the people began to make images in temples under trees and on the tops of mountains and hills. People would gather together and bow down to them. And the false prophets would say, this image is a source of benefit or harm. It is appropriate to serve it and fear it. Their priests would tell them, this service will enable you to multiply and be successful. Do this and this, or do not do this and don't do that. So when people say today, by the way, how could people have such a false believer? You could see how it builds up like this. Subsequently, other deceivers arose and declared that a specific star, sphere, or angel had spoken to them and commanded them, serve me in this manner. He would then relate a mode of service, telling them, do this, do not do this. So there's a whole society built on falsehood. Thus, these practices spread throughout the world. People would serve images with strange practices, one more distorted than the other, offer sacrifices to them, and bow down to them. As the years passed, God's glorious and awesome name was forgotten by the entire population. You can see how that would happen. It was no longer part of their speech or thought, and they no longer knew him. Thus, all the common people, the women and the children, would know only the image of wood or stone, and the temples of stone to which they were trained from their childhood to bow down and serve, and in whose name they swore. The wise men among them would think that there is no God other than the stars and spheres for whose sake and in resemblance of which they had made these images. The eternal rock, meaning God, was not recognized or known by anyone in the world, with the exception of a few individuals, for example, Hannah, Methuselah, Noah, Shem, and Aver. The world continued in this fashion until the pillar of the world, the patriarch Abraham, was born. Now we're talking about Abraham. This is the environment in which Abraham was born and raised. After this mighty man was weaned, meaning Abraham, he began to explore and think. Though he was a child, he began to think incessantly throughout the day and night, wondering, how is it possible for the sphere to continue to revolve without having anyone controlling it? Who is causing it to revolve? Surely it does not cause itself to revolve. So he's looking at all these creations in the world and in the sky that people are worshiping. It's like, well, what's pushing them? What is moving those planets? What is moving those stars? They're not moving themselves. He had no teacher, nor was there anyone to inform him. Rather, he was mired in Ur Kasdim among the foolish idolaters. He grew up as a contrarian. His father, mother, and all the people around him were idol worshippers, and he would worship with them. However, his heart was exploring and gaining understanding. So according to the Rambam and his sources, Avraham Avinu was an idol worshiper, but at the same time, he's thinking, and he's like, wait a minute, this is not making any sense. Ultimately, he appreciated the way of truth and understood the path of righteousness through his accurate comprehension. And you can bet he got that through some form of meditation. He realized that there was one God who controlled the sphere, that he created everything, and that there is no other God among all the other entities. He knew that the entire world was making a mistake. What caused them to err was their service of the stars and images, which made them lose awareness of the truth. So the Rambam is saying that with this, that there was false practices based on the false belief, and they kept doing the false practices, which reinforced their false belief, and they got so preoccupied with that they were unable to look above what they were doing and say, wait a minute, is this making sense? Abraham was 40 years old when he became aware of his creator. When he recognized and knew him, he began to formulate replies to the inhabitants of Ur Kasdim and debate with them, telling them that they were not following a proper path. He broke their idols and began to teach the people that it is fitting to serve only the God of the world. To him alone is it fitting to bow down, sacrifice, and offer libations, so that the people of future generations would recognize him. Conversely, it is fitting to destroy and break all the images, lest all the people err concerning them, like those people who thought that there are no other gods besides these images. When he overcame them through the strength of his arguments, the king desired to kill him. He doesn't say who the king is. He was saved through a miracle. Oh, wait a minute. This might be the king that threw him. We have a story about Abraham being thrown in a furnace. Nimrod? Maybe. He was saved through a miracle and left for Haran. There he began to call in a loud voice to all people and inform them that there is one God. So, from the Torah about calling to God. That informed that there is one God in the entire world, and it is proper to serve him. He would go out and call to the people, gathering them in city after city and country after country, until he came to the land of Canaan, proclaiming God's existence the entire time, as it states in Bereshit, and he called there in the name of the Lord, the eternal God. When the people would gather around him and ask him about his statements, he would explain the statements to each one of them according to their understanding until they turned to the path of truth. Ultimately, thousands and myriads gathered around him. These are the men of the house of Abraham. So when we talk about the Beit Avraham, we're talking about a huge network. he planted in their hearts this great fundamental principle, the principle that there was one God in the entire world. Composed texts about it and taught it to Isaac. So there's actually, according to the Rambam's research, there's a compilation of teachings from Abraham about this, about God. And he taught it to Isaac, his son. Isaac also taught others and turned their hearts to God. He also taught Jacob and appointed him as a teacher. So there's some kind of smicha, there's some kind of official, you're the teacher now type ritual. Jacob taught others and turned the hearts of all those who gathered around him to God. He also taught all of his children. He selected Levi and appointed him as the leader. So according to the Rambam, there's this chain, there's a smicha chain of teachers that's officially handed down. Jacob established Levi as the head of the academy to teach them the way of God and observe the mitzvot of Abraham. Jacob commanded his sons that the leadership should not depart from the descendants of Levi, so that the teachings would not be forgotten. This concept proceeded and gathered strength among the descendants of Jacob and those who collected around them until they became a nation within the world which knew God. So according to the Rambam, starting out of Jacob, there was this teaching about God going on through the ranks, through the generations. When the Jews extended their stay in Egypt, however, they learned from the Egyptians' deeds and began worshiping the stars as they did, with the exception of the tribe of Levi, who clung to the mitzvot of the patriarchs. The tribe of Levi never served false gods. So, bad environment, which of course raises the question of if the teaching was that right, if the truth, if they were teaching the truth, and they were teaching it correctly, how are these Ivrim so weak that you just put them in a different circumstance and they get off the derech? I think that's a valid question, but I think he attempts to answer it. Within a short time, the fundamental principle that Abraham had planted would have been uprooted, and the descendants of Jacob would have returned to the errors of the world and their crookedness. Because of God's love for us and to uphold the oath he had made to Abraham, our patriarch, he, meaning God, brought forth Moses, our teacher. This is right at the parsha we're reading. The master of all prophets, and sent him to redeem the Jews. After Moses, our teacher, prophesied, and God chose Israel as his inheritance, he crowned them with mitzvot and informed them of the path to serve him, teaching them the judgment prescribed for idol worship and all those who stray after it. So according to this, for whatever reason, the Jews got off the path, got into this Egyptian environment, and started adopting false belief and practices. And so God basically says, okay, out you go. Here's the right way, and gave us the Torah full of mitzvot. And according to what the Rambam is saying here, doing the mitzvot, having the right life will remind us, will keep us mindful of what the proper belief is, and we will direct our lives towards the real God and not towards the fake gods. So the Rambam is placing this huge emphasis on how we live as a means of reminding us how to think. That's very interesting. That is very interesting. Okay, so where does it put us here? Okay, so this is how Abraham experienced God. He used his brain, he used his critical thinking, and he dedicated himself to living in such a way that he would remain mindful of this core principle he deduced, which is there's one God to serve. So obviously, one question that comes to mind is, well, I mean, so what kind of lifestyle did Abraham have that kept him mindful of this? How come Abraham didn't fall off the derech? We just said that he was in a hugely contradictory environment. Even his parents worshiped idols, and yet he hung in there. So that's an example of, and going up through Jacob and after Jacob to other generations, we didn't have the Torah. We didn't have mitzvot from God. So, but we still managed to remain mindful of this core principle that Abraham had to do. So he didn't make it up. He figured it out. This is the way the world works. So we had some way of living without having to open a book and say, do this, do this, do this. We had formed that lifestyle on our own that kept us believing and experiencing the one true God. So one thing that says to me is that the mitzvot we do are not the end in them themselves, they're the means to the end. The end is remaining mindful of that core principle. And you know that you're even doing a mitzvah wrong if you're not cognizant of who you're serving. Okay. So that brings up critical thinking. And we're going to look a little bit at Siebold to learn a little bit more about critical thinking for a second here. He's the expert on mental toughness, and this is what he says. The great ones are critical thinkers. And he has a quote from an author named Sherry Disler who says, critical thinkers do not just drift through life subject to every message they hear. They think through their choices and make conscious decisions. This is what Siebold says as a follow-up. There are 5 basic levels of thinking we engage in at any given time. The lowest level is unengaged, going through the motions without really thinking about what we're doing. Jews do that. The next level is negative thinking, which is rooted in a fear and scarcity-based consciousness. We look for the negative in every situation. Next is neutral thinking, which is neither positive nor negative. Neutral thinking implies a lack of energy at best, indifference at worst. So this is the thinking pattern of those who would like to be more successful and they're aware of how to do it, but can't be bothered to invest much thought, energy into the process. Neutral thinking is one of the hallmarks of the middle class. The next level is positive thinking, which often manifests positive results. This mindset is rooted in love and abundance, but is sometimes blended by emotion. The mantra of the positive thinker is, look for the good in everything, like Gamzu Latova. It's a good place to start unless you're standing in the middle of a highway and a truck is headed towards you at 90 miles an hour, and positive thinking tells you the truck will swerve out of your path. Positive thinking is a good foundation, yet it's no match for the world-class philosophy of critical thinking. Critical thinkers use specific criteria to evaluate their reasoning and make decisions unclouded by emotion. The critical thinker reasons that the speeding truck driver may not see him and decides to move out of the way. Critical thinking has been called the most difficult work in the age in which we now live, the age of the mind. So, Stephen Siebold, the world trainer of greatness, would consider Avraham Avinu a critical thinker, I do believe. And since he says that it's governed by reason, not emotion, I think you can conclude that the Avodah Zorah, the false lifestyle around the false belief, was emotion-driven. It doesn't mean we don't have emotion, but we channel the emotion into what our mind determines. Okay. Questions or comments before we answer the meditation questions from last week? Okay. Here's our questions from last week. I did the meditation standing up for the second week, tried it last week. Without knowing the suggested points to practice last week, I closed my eyes, was steady, and felt good and focused. Now you say it's recommended to keep the eyes closed. I did say that when you're doing seated meditation. I imagine that so we are in a ready state, but I tried to open my eyes and it was distracting to see the room. I'm probably too accustomed to keeping my eyes closed from years of previous meditation. What are your thoughts? Second question, which is related. I realize that I may have made slight internal movements during meditation, but they wouldn't be noticeable to an outside observer. What are your thoughts on whether this is movement or not? Okay. First way I'm going to answer the question is by telling you how I was trained. Sitting meditation. In my training, meditation is required in order to advance in rank in Bhagavad Kung Fu practice. And depending on your level, you have to meditate 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour 15, an hour and a half. You sit in your position and with your eyes closed, and you keep that position, and Sifu times you. If you move slightly, you fail. You go like this, up, you failed. You can't move. And I'm going to reinforce where that comes from in a second. With standing meditation, as I mentioned to you, we do it all the time, and and we get tested on it, and we've had to assume 26 positions, 30 seconds each, and if you move, you fail. You got to hold it. You got to be still, no moving. And he says, you move, you fail, and that has happened to people. Obviously, you get a second chance after a certain amount of time, but this is real stuff. Okay, so no movement. When you sit, you keep your eyes closed. When you stand, you keep your eyes open. However, I don't know for sure, but I'm willing to bet that there are some people who have kept their eyes closed in the standing meditation, and I don't think you would get fail for doing that. If it helps you relax and keep your focus, then you do it. Okay, so I think that's an option. But let me tell you where the emphasis on not moving at all, even if it's not noticeable to the outside observer, comes from. Okay. This is a very famous book, Mindfulness in Plain English. I'm going to attempt to pronounce his name, Bhante Gunaratana. Okay, very famous teacher worldwide of meditation and mindfulness. His biography is this long. Okay, this was required reading for part of my training, and I read it a few times. It says it. Okay. The type of meditation he talks about in this book is called Vipassana meditation, which is supposed to promote mindfulness. Mindfulness being just being in the present moment and letting the contents of your mind just flow by. We are doing a basic form of Vipassana meditation at the end of these classes when we just choose a focal point and try to stay with the focal point. The whole idea of that is to develop the skill of staying focused and not let any of your mind's contents and not let any thoughts or feelings distract you. Let it just go. So that's what we're doing. Okay, and this is what he says about how to do this meditation. Okay, he says, once you sit, do not change the position again until the end of the time you determined at the beginning. Suppose you change your original position because it is uncomfortable and assume another position. What happens after a while is that the new position becomes uncomfortable. Then you want another, and after a while, it too becomes uncomfortable. So you may go on shifting, moving, changing one position to another the whole time you are on your meditation cushion, and you may not gain a deep and meaningful level of concentration. This is why you don't fidget even slightly. It robs you of your concentration. Therefore, you must make every effort not to change your original position. Now, in these tests, when I get tested for meditation, you're allowed a certain amount of settling, but you can't just settle for like 3 minutes. You have to have done this so many times that you have the settling part down pat. I got to do this. I got to do this. Heads up, done. I'm ready. So then the clock starts. So when you practice meditation, You have to practice getting settled. Okay. Another point he makes. General rules. The purposes of various meditation postures is threefold. First, they provide a stable feeling in the body. This allows you to remove your attention from such issues as balance and muscular fatigue so that you can center your concentration on the formal object of meditation. That's what we said last week. Your body has to be in the background. You have to have the strength and the structure and the comfort and the relaxation. So you focus, your mind is focusing on. Your body you have to transcend the body. Second, they promote physical immobility, which is then reflected by immobility of mind. Very, very key. You stir stuff up in your mind if your body stirs. The body follows what's in the mind, but the mind also follows what the body's doing. Okay, if you have immobility, you have a deeply settled and tranquil concentration. Third, if you have the right posture, you have the ability to sit for a long period of time without yielding to the meditator's three main enemies: pain, muscular tension, and falling asleep. Okay. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about his teachings to drive home the point is this. He actually has a chapter talking about dealing with problems, including physical pain. Nobody likes pain, yet everybody has some at one time or another. It is one of life's most common experiences and is bound to arise in your meditation in one form or another. Okay. He talks a lot about being prepared and stuff and having the right position, making sure you're not hungry, making sure you're not too tired. There's a lot of preparational stuff. Okay. But if you made all these adjustments and tinkering and you still have pain, this is what he says: make the pain your object of meditation. Don't jump up and don't get excited. Just observe the pain mindfully. When the pain becomes demanding, you will find it pulling your attention off the breath. Don't fight back. Just let your attention slide easily over onto the simple sensation. Go into the pain fully. Don't block the experience. Explore the feeling. Get beyond your avoiding reaction and go into the pure sensations that lie below it. This is heavy stuff, and we're actually going to go into this at some other point. So he's actually saying, you have to retain your position. Don't move. Just now focus on it. And as we're going to learn at a later point, the more you embrace it, embrace the suck, as the Navy SEALs say, the less it's going to impact you. But what you don't is you don't rub your arm, you don't shift your leg. He's emphasizing you stay still. Okay. And obviously he just said, if you've been concentrating on the breath coming in and out of your nostrils, but now your knee hurts, you are changing your focus to the knee, but that's an exceptional circumstance to be able to deal with the pain. It's not the same thing as like being off balance. Like now I'm going to concentrate on my feet, up a little bit off balance. Now I'm going to concentrate on my shoulder. That's different. That robs you of concentration. This redeploys your concentration, but just on another object. And you can see that therefore that's kind of advanced. But the reason why I'm bringing it up is to demonstrate the importance that master meditation teachers place on being still. Okay, so the answer is no moving for you. Okay, questions or comments before we meditate? All right, let us do that.